I don't want this response to come off like I'm bitter at rich people. Hey guys, so I actually wasn't planning on filming this video, but okay, so the Cornell Sun, our daily newspaper or whatever, released this article today, and I kind of just wanted to talk about it, talk about my perspective, and talk about this big thing that's happening in the news right now. Current events. This article they released today, they released it 20 hours ago. It's called Gordon Kaplan, 88, paid $75,000 to rig his daughter's ACT scores, the FBI says. He and nearly 50 others were charged with fraud. This is the article. This has been a really big thing in the news lately. All of a sudden, they're finding all these rich people who paid for their kids to get into colleges like Yale was one, Stanford. And I thought this was really interesting. And so I kind of just wanted to talk about this, talk about where I come from and how I sort of see this. I think to kind of explain my perspective a little bit, I wanted to talk about where I came from and what sort of high school and life. So I come from Massachusetts, northern central. This part of Massachusetts is kind of interesting. It's not exactly what you think of when you think of Massachusetts. Like if you think of Massachusetts, you think like Harvard, Boston, like the elite. But I live very far away from that. I come from a very conservative town. I come from a very working class, poor area. A lot of these people are normal workers, factory workers. They work in minimum wage jobs. That's just where I come from. It's not glamorous life. It's not rich people. It's not really the suburbs. You know what I'm saying? I would call it very rural and lower working class. The high school I went to was very small. So a lot of the students at my school, if they went to college at all, they would end up at community college or they would end up in a trade. There's a very popular trade school in my town. A lot of them didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have a lot of reason to really go to these more like elite schools. They were either first gen. It is kind of a very poor area. I've had a job since I was 16 to kind of aid with paying for things. I still have a job at Cornell. I have pretty good financial aid. It was a big deal when I was applying to Cornell. I personally am the first student from my school in like 6 years, I think, to get into an Ivy League school. It was a big deal when I got in because it was so unusual. There was 96 kids in my graduating class. I think I was probably the only one to get into a top 20 school. It was the education, I don't want to trash it because, again, Massachusetts is still one of the better states with education. But I think we had 8 AP classes total running. A lot of advocating for myself, saying I want to take these classes, I want to take online classes. There weren't a lot of resources available for kids that really wanted to do well academically. But nonetheless, I'm proud of that. This school, to me, was where I came from. I might not agree with all the people there and their politics and their work ethic, but it's where I came from. There's nothing I can do to change that. And so I guess when I kind of read these articles about rich people paying and bribing to get their kids into college, I wasn't really surprised. And I actually found this talking to some other students. They agreed with me. They were like, yeah, I thought we already knew this. This was kind of old news. It really didn't shock anyone here because if you look outside, there's a lot of rich kids here. you can really tell that the majority of these people, or at least a good amount of them, have money. They come from money. You see it in the brands they have. They all have those Canada Goose jackets. They have the AirPods, the Beats. You can hear it when they talk, when they complain that they got into Cornell or they wanted to get in a better school, or they come from money. They come from feeder schools. I don't want to say everyone, because I don't want to make it seem like these kids didn't work to get in here. Because at the end of the day, everyone who gets into Cornell, worked to get into Cornell, Or they worked to get into the Ivy League. You can't just sit on your butt. However, I think it's a lot easier. Where I'm coming from, I'm starting from here. I'm starting from the bottom stair. And some of these kids are starting here, where they're in feeder schools. Cornell already knows they're going to accept a certain amount of kids from these schools. I don't want to discredit the other students that got into this university, because I think we all worked really hard. We all took a million AP classes. We all did this, we all did that. But I do think it's easier to get into one of these schools when you're already at that level of kind of elite education. So when I read this article, I wasn't surprised. I was like, yeah, we all knew that rich people get in. We all knew kind of rich people want their kids to succeed, and we all knew they kind of cheat the system a little. I don't want this response to come off like I'm bitter at rich people. I'm bitter at the upper class because I come from a very working class area. I just think, had I come from that kind of thing, it wouldn't have been such a shock if I got into Cornell. And I guess what I'm getting at is there's just this gap between classes that really emphasizes the gap between education. When you are that lower working class, you have less opportunity to educate yourself. You have less resources. Coming from a poor area, I went to a poor high school. Coming from a poor area, we had very poor clubs. We had poor everything. Whereas if I had come from one of these feeder schools, I would have had a very good education, strong AP program. The college success rate would have been really high. And this gap, it just makes it hard for these kids who really do come from poor schools but want to succeed. It's hard to get out. I always told myself my goal was to get out of the town I lived in, because I didn't want to be trapped there forever. And I knew if I didn't work really hard, I would be stuck in the area I lived in, working a minimum wage job for the rest of my life. Because that's what I saw people from my high school doing who graduated before me. That's what I saw other people I knew, adults I knew. That's what I saw, is you get stuck in this kind of area, undereducated, not really using your full potential, and you end up not really that happy. The cheating is bad, obviously. The cheating in the system is not good, but everyone already knows it's not a fair gap between the upper class and the working class. Everyone knows that everything's easier. It's easier to get in this elite school when you are that upper class, when you do come from that money and your parents are educated. They know how to do the applications. They know what to do to get you into these schools. And you're coming from a first-gen family or something. You don't know how to do it, or you don't have the resources, or you can't afford an SAT tutor. Rich kids can afford to pay for 20 plus college applications. It's just naturally not fair. Upper class people have more resources, so they have more chance to get into these elite schools. However, one thing I did find surprising about this article is that this topic is actually getting coverage. They're actually getting called out for it. I'm surprised that this elitist class is kind of like being called on their bullshit, you know? We've known about cheating scandals on the SAT, on this and that, but it does surprise me that people are actually talking about it now. They're talking about what these people are doing to actually get their kids into college and how they're using their money for dishonesty to buy this status symbol. The other thing I think is really interesting about the situation is how telling it is of our society now. How having a degree from one of these elite universities is a status symbol, and how desperate these upper class people are to kind of attain that status. They can't kind of accept that their kid might not be smart enough or determined enough to get into these universities, and they're still willing to kind of force them into it. Obviously, we don't know the exact circumstance around a lot of it. I was reading one article that said their daughter had not gotten over like a 22 on the ACT. If you can't score high enough, just don't apply to that university. Like, apply to the ones that are kind of your caliber. That's fine. And I think there's just such status attainment when you can get into this college. Like, I think it's fascinating how getting into a certain school or getting a certain education can suddenly be telling about where you came up. So for these upper class people, they can't deal with their kid not having this symbol of status, so they have to fabricate it. Sort of indicates a larger issue here of how much worth we really put on a college education. I'm not here to say college isn't worth it, okay? I'm obviously at college. I'm obviously here to get a degree and get a job and whatever. But I think that our society now is very, you have to go to college. If you do not go to college, you will not succeed. College is success. You have to get into the best college. You have to go to the best college, the most elite, top 20, like SAT, take it 20 times, do this, do that, do everything. And I just kind of like don't like that. This education elitism kind of rules our world in weird ways. We can't be content with kids that aren't incredibly smart and gonna do crazy internships and go into business or mechanical engineering or something. Like, not everyone that graduates from an Ivy League university is gonna be a millionaire. So why are we treating it like if you do not get into these colleges, you're not going to succeed? This expectation that these upper class people have on their children is kind of, I don't want to say disturbing, but like it's a little disturbing. In a way that I never had an expectation placed on me that I had to go to Cornell or I had to get into an Ivy League school, because that wasn't what people from my town did. So I didn't have to deal with this incredible pressure that if I wasn't smart enough, my parents are gonna like fabricate it so I'm smart enough, because they can't deal with me just not being smart enough. And in some ways, I almost think I'm lucky in that sense, coming from this working class family. They didn't put that expectation on me. I think it's important to value a child regardless of what college they can get into. And obviously some of these people are having issues with that, because they aren't just like, okay, well, just get into whatever college you can. They're like, okay, I'm gonna pay $75,000 to get you into some elite college. I think these articles, they're just very telling of how society is viewing success and what they think is having a good life, I guess. All in all, I mean, you can think what you want. I think it's really interesting to see this covered in the Sun and obviously like actual famous newspapers and stuff. It's been really interesting to learn about. For my, working class Cornell kind of life, I just think it tells a lot about our society and kind of maybe this overemphasis we place on education. Not that we shouldn't value education, but maybe we shouldn't view what college you go to as a success rate, and more like if you're a good person and you're kind of like happy in your life and you can afford groceries. But like, that's just me, you know? Thanks for listening to my opinion. If you guys have any thoughts on this, leave it in the comments. I'm really interested to hear what you guys think about this and kind of how you view the situation. I'll link some of the articles I read in the description, including the Sun one, so you guys can read about this too. That's my perspective from a Ivy League student that came from rural Massachusetts. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!